You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Cimino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer.
Good morning.
Good
morning, everyone.
Wow, wait, what is going on? Michael says good morning. He never says good morning at home. This week, we're going to start off with our good friends at Tesla. Tesla. Now, if you haven't been paying attention, Tesla sells something called autopilot, enhanced autopilot, full self-driving, the nonsense mode, dumb, give us your money mode. We've talked about many times about how we have issues with the very least of just calling something autopilot when it's not. And now the good folks at NHTSA said, wait a second, we should look into this. And they've been looking into it because these vehicles have been having some issues. Now, one of the things most consumers have the belief that, hey, I have something called autopilot. It drives itself. Tesla's put out videos where the car is steering itself, doing all sorts of things. These are highly edited videos that are essentially lies. And then in very small fine print on their website, it says humans must be paying attention at all times. Keep your hands on the wheels, hands at 10 and 2. These videos are just for fiction and for entertainment purposes only. Something like that. They have some vague legal description like that. And one of the things that this hacker hacked into Tesla's software and discovered something called Elon mode. Well, that's what he's calling it. In the comments of the code, apparently it was listed as executive mode. That allows you to bypass these basic safety features that say, hey, put your hands on the wheel, dummy. Let's make sure you're actually paying attention. And so part of NHTSA's investigation is they're looking into that, and they're looking at, Tesla's crashing into things when they shouldn't be crashing into things. Michael, I'm sure you have some thoughts.
Well, my thoughts on this is it's just another little reactive order to Tesla that doesn't address the overall problem here. I mean, obviously, in the emergency vehicles crashes, we're seeing drivers who are maybe drunk, maybe asleep. They're not in control of the vehicle, we don't believe, when it's running into the fire trucks. They've got it in autopilot mode, and how they're able to do that is the problem here. There are a number of ways to disable the autopilot driver monitoring. There have been steering wheel. They had a Tesla buddy you could put on the steering wheel. There are weights. You can leave your hand on the wheel and do whatever else you want, play a video game. All of those are ways to get around Tesla's driver monitoring system if you truly think that the vehicle is going to drive itself safely to your destination and you don't want to be bothered, you're too lazy to drive, or you want to do something else. In this case, there's an actual mode that's been inserted by Tesla that allows that to occur. Basically, you're not going to get nags if you're not touching the steering wheel. The car can do whatever it wants, and you can do whatever you want. And that's a huge problem, obviously, from a safety perspective. But it's NHTSA once again choosing a reactive path. They're saying, "Oh, we found out." It's like they're scrubbing they're scrubbing the wires every day and looking for a story and saying, "Oh, there's this Elon mode. Let's go after that." And they put out a special order on this. Meanwhile, these Teslas are still hitting emergency vehicles with flashing lights, and nobody's getting to the root of that problem. And, some of the other issues we're seeing with Tesla point to a pretty clear problem with the ability of these vehicles to see and respond to threats. And we're not seeing NHTSA move on that point. Instead, they seem to be finding, this is the third or fourth special order I've seen from them. And, they focused on, in the past, even in other recalls, on things like Teslas that are programmed to be able to roll through stop signs, these constant little things that pop up or that Elon decides are going to come out. He said 6 months ago he was going to loosen the reins on this steering wheel detection and the driver monitoring system, and it's been done. And now NHTSA is going back and cleaning up that little mess while not addressing the overall big mess that we're worried about, which is the continued inability for these vehicles to detect threats and respond appropriately.
So real quick, I'm going to do a quick summary of, okay, so autopilot is basically lane keeping assist and automated cruise control. Pretty much all new vehicles sold today have some form of this. Enhanced autopilot does lane changes. So if you hit your blinker, it will safely or potentially move to the next lane or something like that. Again, a bunch of cars have this feature. Consumer Reports did a whole breakdown of every manufacturer that has it. Says Tesla is just kind of like, kind of middle of the road at best on this. And then full self-driving is where it says, hey, we'll recognize stop signs, we'll recognize traffic lights, and we'll make unprotected left turns. And you can see some very funny videos about how dangerous that is. So with Tesla, this is great. So there was earlier this month is an article from Yahoo. Earlier this month, Musk live streamed himself driving a Tesla in Palo Alto, California, while using a phone, a violation of Tesla's own rules and California state law. And during this video, he had no nags in it. The steering wheel didn't be like, hey, put your hands on the wheel, we're going to disable this function, anything like that. And I think that's how this hacker is like, wait a second, how did he get this thing? And let's go past it. It's very funny. So hidden in this article, well, at the bottom is Tesla has long said its driver assistance software is not a substitute for a driver, and that currently enabled features do not make the vehicle autonomous. But many owners don't realize this because Michael's muted and he was saying something very smart, I'm sure, and very clever.
Yeah, someone and something in my background can't keep the noise down.
Is that a dog?
I wish it was a dog.
Don't worry about the background noise. We can fix it in post. So again, I think not only NHTSA, but we've mentioned the FTC should probably go after them because of these advertising. Not that great. So Michael, NHTSA, besides these special orders, is anything going to happen?
And I mean, they hinted a couple of weeks ago that something bigger was coming down the line. Hopefully it's a resolution of why Tesla's vision systems and their planning systems that they've got working here to avoid obstacles and to prevent collisions aren't working, and particularly aren't working in the situations that we've seen that are problematic, like fire trucks, emergency vehicles, roadside crews, motorcycles, and other issues. I mean, fundamentally, I would say we think that Tesla's safety systems aren't sufficiently mature to be operating, particularly not when there's a mode that's enabled that ensures that the human driver isn't going to wake up or respond to what's going on. So that's the resolution we're hoping to see from the DOT, and ultimately not simple responses to all the goofy things Elon comes up with every few months,
like fart mode. Anyway, let's jump into something a little more serious. Listeners, you remember ARC Automotive? We talked about them a few months back. This is when NHTSA said they spent 8 years investigating their airbags and started initiating maybe a recall. It was very confusing to me in my simple brain. But now NHTSA is pushing again for their voluntary recall. But ARC is fighting back, saying it's accusing NHTSA of overstepping its authority and calling the ruptures occasional isolated failures. So keep in mind, these are the inflators, the little canisters of whatever magic gas is inside there. There's some extra welding slag in there. And when you get into an accident that activates the airbag deploys, but also so does a little bullet. Some shrapnel comes in and injures and or kills people. Bad thing to happen. No. And some individual car manufacturers have said, hey, we're going to voluntarily recall these things because, a dead customer is not a repeat customer. ARC Automotive objects, and this is ongoing right now.
Yeah, so this is a few months ago, I want to say it was April and May-ish, we were talking about NHTSA had preliminarily notified ARC, the airbag manufacturer, that there was a defect, that Anthony just described, where this is ammonium nitrate bags. This is something that the agency's been looking at since Takata. It's similar in that there's an ammonium nitrate airbag, but the defect appears to be different. In the Takata situation, we have, I think, somewhere around 30 deaths and 100 plus injuries. And that's because the ammonium nitrate in those bags is degrading. And when it explodes, it's not a controlled explosion. It's all at once. It basically destroys the entire airbag and can kill or injure passengers. In the ARC situation, there's the weld slag that apparently is not the defect here is not a design defect like in Takata, where you have a inherent defect that can come out, and it's in every bag. You have it's basically the defect in Takata is built into every bag. Here, it looks like it's only in the inflators that have this weld slag present. I think we've talked about before whether that's, a Friday afternoon issue. Is it something that is always present? We're not really sure. And so in this case, I think we've seen worldwide about 2 deaths and 9 injuries, 1 death and 6 or 7 injuries in the United States from these airbags. There are about 50 million of them out there. And so, it raises a question after NHTSA makes this initial determination. That's what's happened yesterday. ARC came back a couple of months ago and said, not only they say we're not going to recall these things right now, they said, NHTSA, you don't even have the authority to order us to do this. Well, here comes NHTSA making initial defect determination that requests that the manufacturer ARC conduct a recall. And where that goes from here is very similar to the last time. ARC is going to come back and make a response. But the additional thing is that in a month from now, NHTSA is going to have a public hearing on this entire issue. The agency is going to present all of their arguments. ARC is going to present their arguments. There will be an opportunity for interested groups and individuals to present their arguments. I'm sure we will. And at that point, there's a decision to make. ARC either says, hey, we're going to recall these, or the agency says, yes, you're going to recall them, and issues a final order that ARC can then decide to recall, or they can take NHTSA to court. I expect that we might see the latter take place here. NHTSA is making some, arguments that, I haven't seen before around the de minimis part of there's a really long and tortured history of recalls involving, a very few incidents across millions of products, and manufacturers coming back and saying, well, this is going to be a problem because we're just not seeing enough incidents. This is this shouldn't be a recall. It doesn't occur often enough for it to be considered a real safety issue. And in this case, where you have 1 death and 6 or 7 injuries, I expect that the manufacturers are going to be trying to make NHTSA show, first of all, prove that this defect, the specific defect that's identified, is what's taking place, and prove that the recall is, or the defect is not so small as to not require the agency to pursue a recall or this type of recall in the future. So there's a lot of issues there that are going to have to be worked out, probably in court at some point.
There's an overriding issue, which is that the industry knows how to make these safe. They haven't done it for cars because they're not required to do it for cars. But I want to remind our listeners that the military has standards that assures similar devices are safe, not at the beginning of life, but at the end of life. So if their design life is, for example, 30 years, You can do a lot of accelerated life testing on devices like this, and then go ahead and exercise them so that you can develop very high confidence and very high reliability for these devices. It's essential because they're life-saving or life-determining devices. Why NHTSA hasn't stepped up to this and put a standard in place that would once and for all solve this problem is a mystery to me. It seems like a straightforward thing to do. It's something that industry knows how to do. The only reason for not doing it, I suppose, is because either they haven't thought of it or they just don't think it's important to save people's lives. It's a mystery to me. But again, industry knows how to solve this problem. Industry solves this problem every day for military and commercial single-shot devices, which is what they're called. It's far past time for NHTSA to put a standard in place that requires automotive customers to get the same level of safety as people who use them in military and commercial applications.
But Fred, so you're saying that that Michael's muted again?
I would have cut you off if I wasn't. So.
That's okay. Yeah. I gotta. But Fred, you're saying okay. So they do this for the military customers. They do it, and so what experience would a little company like ARC have with military experience? Come on.
Well, you might recall that they've been in the military business for, I don't know, since World War II, something like that, building exactly this same class of devices.
Well, there goes my facetious argument. Michael.
Well, NHTSA has also pointed out, something really interesting here, which is that these are safety devices. This isn't an axle. It's not a tire. This is something that fundamentally is supposed to be keeping you safe in the car. So where you might see, an axle shaft break and, the vehicle might be at a stoplight or might not be moving or might be moving slowly and no one's injured. Here, when these things rupture, they are injuring people or killing people. It's hard to escape shrapnel being ejected from a, explosive device right in front of you. And with their heightened status as a safety device, there's kind of a bigger burden. And I think we certainly agree with that. There's a bigger burden on manufacturers when they're creating something that's explicitly a safety device to do so in a way that prevents that device from becoming a danger to occupants. And that's a pretty powerful argument that NHTSA made in its initial defect determination. And I think, that argument might win the day if this does end up in court.
I just want to remind our listeners again what shrapnel is. Shrapnel, when you say that, it's kind of a euphemism. Shrapnel is a red-hot piece of jagged metal that's traveling at high velocity. And so when we talk about shrapnel, we're talking about red-hot pieces of steel traveling at velocities, close to the speed of sound that are directed at you. This is not a happy experience for anybody who's been in the vicinity of shrapnel.
No, and in fact, in some of the first Takata cases that came out, there were some rather low speed collisions involved, and police and emergency responders were initially investigating them as murders or suspicious deaths because they had no idea what was going on at that point. So it's certainly a violent and dangerous prospect.
And listeners, that's why I drive wearing full flak jackets and blast shields. I recommend you do the same. But if you don't want to do the same, go to autosafety.org and click that donate button. That's right. There you go. That's a horrible transition from hot metal shrapnel to donation ask. But hey, that's what I do. Is it time for Kyle? I think it's time for Kyle. A little lighthearted fun. Time for Kyle. He needs his own theme music. Okay. You don't know the Kyle I'm talking about? GM Cruise and those robo-taxis of hell. So, in an incident on the 14th of August, first responders were treating a pedestrian who had been struck by a vehicle and had life-threatening injuries with significant bleeding. 2 autonomous cruise vehicles had stopped in nearby lanes and were not moving, blocking ingress and egress, according to the San Francisco Fire Department. As the emergency crews loaded the patient into an ambulance, the vehicles remained stopped in 2 lanes, and police attempts to take over the vehicles manually were unsuccessful. The fire department had to locate a police officer on scene and ask him to move his vehicle in order to leave the scene, which the report states further delayed patient care. Unfortunately, in this case, the patient was late getting to the hospital and did not make it. Now, GM Cruise disputes this, and they supplied video from their angle to tech-friendly outlets, which I found interesting, instead of like supplying this video to, I don't know, real
YouTube
journalists. Yeah, or putting it on the internet for people to see. You're right. Why not put it on YouTube or give it to, I don't know, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post? Instead, they gave it to TechCrunch and some blogger at Forbes who, as far as I can tell, hasn't shared this video. But it's...
Yeah, where's the video, Kyle?
Kyle, where's the video?
Well, this one's interesting in a number of ways. I mean, first of all, the person who ended up dying was struck by a vehicle driven by a human, which Cruise has, brought up in their defense a number of occasions.
Right.
There's some debate around whether or not the emergency vehicles were actually delayed long enough to hinder care being provided to the pedestrian victim of the previous incident. So there's a lot of debate going on back and forth between Cruise and San Francisco officials on this issue. We haven't seen the video yet, so we don't know. We're apparently at this point essentially relying on hearsay from both parties, but it would be interesting to see the video. And there's not much else to go on at this point, really, without some actual tape of the incident.
Well, I'd go on at the fact that, okay, emergency first responders have been doing this kind of thing for, I don't know, 100 years. I mean, I don't know, pretty long time, right? And so they're used to an emergency of getting people to move their vehicles out of the way and causing problems. And there's no driver in the car, and the police is just kind of like, well, we couldn't move it. And I guess what GM Cruise has said in the past is, well, we have an 800 number, and there's some YouTube videos you can download to how you can take over this vehicle, which is insanity. And perhaps their argument is going to be like, look, if you guys just got rid of all of your training for the last 100 years and just did this instead, it would have been okay, which is a dumb argument. And it's one I'm going to suggest that GM Cruise makes, because, hey, when it comes to brains, let's talk GM Cruise. I know. But related to this, there was a large protest this past Monday outside of Cruise's headquarters in San Francisco. And so I guess the residents of San Francisco are just sick and tired of these things. It's fascinating. Maybe it's because they don't have any say in the democracy of San Francisco, because the residents are against it, the fire department's against it, the police are against it, but the state of California says go for it. And what I find fascinating, correct me if I'm wrong, these, Waymo is headquartered in Mountain View, California. They're, these are Silicon Valley companies, and there's no such thing as self-driving cars being allowed on the road in Silicon Valley, where these companies are headquartered. That seems surprising. When I worked in software, there's a saying called "eat your own dog food." If you're going to get customers to buy this stuff, you better say this is really good. And these guys will not eat their own dog food. They're letting their dog shit all over San Francisco.
I mean, I think that's somewhat accurate. I mean, they're not listening to the people who are, being affected by these cars. And, we've continued over and over to question whether there's an actual use case for these vehicles or whether they're just adding problems and commotion to the streets of San Francisco. Right now, I think it's certainly the latter. I don't think you would see this type of, this strong response from emergency services, from, city leaders and commissioners to this problem if they didn't feel like they needed to do more here to address the situation, but they're powerless. I mean, they functionally can't do anything without running to the California DMV or running to the California Public Utilities Commission, which, as we know, has, an interesting composition, including at least one former cruise managing attorney. So there's a huge problem for localities who are trying to keep their citizens safe. I think we need to listen to them a lot more than we're doing, rather than, rushing to get state laws out there that erase the ability for local folks to take charge of their streets.
Crazy concept there. Related to driverless cars, and I think we've touched on this in the past. There was research out of King's College of London. They found that through testing over 8,000 images through pieces of AI software, that detection accuracy, can the cars identify adults and pedestrians, and children, that the AI software had a detection accuracy for adults that was almost 20% higher than it was for children, and just over 7.5% more accurate for light-skinned pedestrians compared to their darkest-skinned counterparts. The researchers say the major cause of this discrepancy is the images used in the AI training systems. Basically, they're putting a bunch of white adults into the training model, and so the fairness of the AI systems, like, I'm not used to seeing children and or people with darker skin. Hence, we can't identify them. Hence, this is going to be a safety thing. In my mind, this seems like a pretty easy problem to solve. Like, I don't understand how you. I do, as I say this out loud, I do understand how you create this problem for yourself. You're a white dude sitting in an office, be like, hey, that's the only people who exist. White 25 to 35-year-old men. And that's all I need photos of, because I'm on Grindr all day. Wait, what?
And this sounds a lot like what we talked about with Beth Brooke a few weeks ago, about needing more female crash dummies, needing to get different bodies into different spots in the car, because right now, you're safest as a 50% white male driver in the driver's seat. Here, we're seeing something very similar, where the training that AI is using is mostly based on, presumably Western male, white people. And so they're not going to be able to detect anything else until those are introduced into the training regimen for this AI or this machine learning, whatever these systems are that the article is discussing. And, this is just a fundamental matter of fairness. No one should have a decreased chance of being detected by an oncoming vehicle. I don't think anyone in America is willing to accept that as a proposition. And, maybe that's a little aspirational, but this is something that has to be worked out before these things get out on the roads and start making decisions that impact lives.
Well, I think Michael put his finger on a fundamental problem here. This is really not, AI is a misnomer. It's not intelligence. It's a correlation engine. And because it's a correlation engine, it always works in retrospective. So what does that mean? Training of these things is done by human beings. When a signal goes through the system, there's a human being somewhere at the end of the system that says, okay, you interpreted this as a goat. No, it's not a goat. It's a human being. And then the system goes back and records that as a probability that what it thought was a goat is actually a human being. So unless you put in lots and lots of pictures with lots of diversity, and you have human beings at the end of it who interpret all of those pictures without their own prejudices impacting their interpretation of the images, then you're going to get a biased system, which is inadequate. So I think that calling it artificial intelligence really does a disservice to the whole public, because it's not. It's something that, if you think about it in chess, right, it doesn't project forward into a novel situation. What it does is it says, all right, I've looked at these 80,000 chess games that have been that have been played in the past. And because of that, I have a statistical probability of X that moving my king to knight 4 is going to allow me to win this game. But, the human being who's actually got a brain would be able to project forward using a variety of algorithms built into a brain, like intelligence, and, understand much better the overall landscape and what it takes to win that chess game. The point of that ramble is that artificial intelligence isn't intelligent. Artificial intelligence is only as good as the human beings who are looking at the images or inputs received by the artificial intelligence system and interpreting them with their own human biases and restrictions. Also, if you don't bring enough data into the system, you're not going to get a reasonable result out. So it's, they used to talk about computers as garbage in, garbage out. In this case, they're not getting enough garbage in, and they're not filtering through the garbage at the end.
The good news on this is the researchers on this paper, they now hope that manufacturers will be more transparent when it comes to how their commercial pedestrian detection AI models are trained, as well as how they perform before they hit the streets.
Good luck.
I agree, but I look at this as the positive view is like, okay, these systems are very early on. They're getting called out pretty early, and this is not an expensive fix. It doesn't even cost them anything. It's like, hey, let's just get a wider array of images to train these systems on, or else we all look like racists in our artificial intelligence that hate children.
That's true. But the state of the art is for the companies to just put these cars out on the street and then use the data that they accumulate as they drive to try to improve the driving algorithms. This is really ass backwards, right? So they're putting untrained systems out on the street, hoping that they're going to train themselves without the benefit of the humans. And the only parameter that the human beings interpreting it, meaning the test drivers, is whether or not there's a catastrophic event that makes them take over control of the vehicle, or it crashes or something else horrible happens. So this is really a very, very poor way of training a machine learning system to avoid critical circumstances that can kill the person who's inside the car.
But that's what Tesla is based on, right? Essentially.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
exactly
that
right.
whole concept is machine learning through these cameras to produce a robo-taxi.
Right.
And
So where's the bank of unbiased humans at the end who are doing this interpretation? I'm going to bet you a nickel that there isn't any such person. They're just waiting for a catastrophic outcome and then saying, "Oops, I guess that's bad. We'll have to look into that."
Well, it depends on what bad is to you. But Fred, this makes me beg the question. I'm going to ask you the question. I don't know if you're ready for it. How safe is safe enough? Welcome to today's Tao or Tao.
You've now entered the Tao of Fred.
All right. Well, the rationale for giving AVs a free pass in state legislations, meaning vacating all of the normal restrictions on automobile safety and travel, is that they will inevitably dramatically improve highway safety. And we've all heard the blather about 94% reduction in accidents and collisions and all that sort of stuff, which is wrong, by the way. NHTSA has never produced a study that says there will be a 94% reduction in human-induced traffics. But there was an interesting video that came out this week from our friend Phil Koopman, which talked about this in some interesting terms. Now, we are as guilty as others of saying, well, the minimum standard for introduction onto the road should be you've demonstrated it as safe as human drivers. I want to emphasize that is a minimum standard, because as Phil points out, that if you're talking about something that is the safest human driver in the overall statistics, which is 1 death per every 100 million miles, which, by the way, means serious injury well, once every 100,000 miles is a roughly factor of 10 between serious injuries and deaths. If you do that, then you are including all of the drunks and spectacularly bad drivers in your standard for what as safe as a human driver is. If your standard is a human driver who's not drunk and who's attentive, we're really, according to Phil, talking about one death roughly every billion miles driven. Now, it's interesting to me that if we look at that, it actually comes back to the NHTSA study that talks about contributions to death from various factors. And it's very similar to the number that you come up with if you look at NHTSA's figures for deaths due to vehicle failures. Now, we've been saying on the show that the deaths due to vehicle failures should be the parameters for AVs because, after all, if they're driving and something bad happens, like an injury or a death, it's because the vehicle has failed. So I think that we are converging with Phil on a standard of roughly, 1 per billion miles, something like that, before you can turn these things loose on the street and say that they are relatively safe compared to human drivers and compared to human drivers in the best of circumstances. So the other thing he points out is that it's not okay to use a single safety parameter, because one of the things that would happen in that is that you could talk about risk transfer onto vulnerable populations. So what that means is that, let's say that you have an algorithm that always kills a pedestrian instead of killing the person inside the car.
I have an algorithm that always kills a pedestrian instead of someone in the car. Was this interactive?
Well, I'm not sure where you're headed with that.
Well, you said, let's say, and I wanted to join in the conversation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your support. But, okay, so, that's an additional parameter. There should be no risk transfer onto vulnerable populations. Should also be that a regulation is in place that says there's no negligent computer programming. You should, don't, come on.
Sorry, this makes me flash back to interviewing software engineers, and this one guy came in and he's like, he flat out states, I write bug-free code. He said that flat out, full of, middle-aged white man confidence. I write bug-free code. And I reacted the same way I did just now. I burst out laughing. And I was like, then we can't afford you. Have a nice day.
All right. Well, this perspective is just a little different. What he meant by negligent computer programming is code that allows vehicles to violate the law, going through red lights.
Like Tesla and the rolling through stop signs. Got it.
Well, yeah, to name one. Yeah, and we're not sure about the others. So that's an important additional parameter. And then he also said that, which makes obvious sense, the vehicles should conform to industry standards for safety testing vehicles before you start testing them on city streets. Now, there is a standard from SAE called SAE J3018 3018 that addresses the safety of test driving autonomous vehicles. But it turns out that that's a very immature document. We're currently in the process of updating that standard for what the test driving parameters should be. So I think that even though it's a great idea, it's immature. And I think that the industry should really look very cautiously at testing these things on the street if there is no applicable standard that's been updated and reflects the current state of the art.
Well, does anybody actually comply to SAE
J3018?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know of anybody who's doing that. I don't know of any company that has said in their literature that, yeah, we're doing J3018. What they did instead is they started an industry group called the Advanced Autonomous Vehicle Safety Coalition, which contains no input from any regulator, contains no input from any consumer advocacy. It's just the promoters' ideas of what's good for them. So, yeah, there's nothing out there that's universally accepted.
So, Fred, you work with SAE, right?
I do.
Okay. I think part of the problem is, and maybe you can address this, is changing these things from SAE J80 blah to the let's not be a dick standard. Let's not be a dick and hurt people standard. Because I think it'd be easier for legislators to get behind that. Like, there's not a single legislator, even as lunatic as some of them are, that'd be like, wait a second, no, I support hurting people. Instead of giving them these very technical, dry names that not even the engineers' mothers would love.
Well, that's true, but I think you're being very sexist about your observation. So
their fathers wouldn't love them either.
No, about the whole dick thing. We need to be more universal. Anyway, so there's another parameter that Phil talks about, which is that other ethical and equity concerns also need to be included in that. Discrimination for any of a variety of reasons. And very importantly, the liability associated with these things. Mercedes says, well, we accept responsibility for any problem that occurs during the testing of level 3 in Nevada, where it's been approved, but it hasn't been tested in a court yet. We don't, we suspect that what's going to happen when they're in front of the judge is they're going to say, like Tesla does, no, not our problem. We have fine print that says you need to be in control at all times. And yeah, we were just kidding about that whole responsibility part.
Yeah. And they're accepting responsibility for, some actions in civil court. They're not accepting responsibility criminally because they can't even make that determination, right? The state could still charge the driver of one of those vehicles regardless of what Mercedes wants. So
right.
They can only partially accept responsibility in that scenario, and it's still going to be a legal burden on whoever's operating the vehicle.
And Phil also points out that there should be no allowance for preemption of local concerns like we're seeing in San Francisco, where they just get overruled. Because after all, the people who are in charge of the city streets are the people in the city. They fix the potholes. They put up the stop signs. They know what's going on in the city to the extent that anybody does. There should be no preemption by higher authorities that say you must vacate all of your rules because the steamroller's coming and you damn well better make room for it.
The steamroller is a new model from GM, right? It's part of their Hummer EV line, the steamroller?
It is, and they're injecting that steamroller technology into their entire AV line.
Oh, good. Sorry, continue.
They're calling it the Kyle Mobiles.
Aye-oh.
And finally, there should be an absolute prohibition against interruption of emergency services from whatever source that takes. And if you cannot field a vehicle where you can guarantee that it's not going to interrupt emergency services, you damn well shouldn't put it on the road. People's lives are at stake, and whether or not it turns out that Cruz was liable in San Francisco for the death of that person in the ambulance, it is very clear from all the evidence that the Cruz vehicle remained stationary in the second lane from the right, rather than pulling over to the right like any human being would, right?
Yeah, it was screwing up traffic. Whether it screwed up that ambulance, regardless, it was once again screwing up traffic by having a what do we call it? An existential crisis in the lane by itself.
So anyway, for our listeners, how safe is safe enough? Who knows? But we're nowhere close to that now. And it's very important to establish that, because how would a developer know they've reached the destination if they don't know what the hell the destination is? Somebody's got to set a standard for this. Somebody's got to establish rules of the road where no rules of the road exist. That's got to be either us or it's got to be NHTSA. So
I vote us, because NHTSA.
Well, we would be faster.
Yes.
However, if we made the rules, we wouldn't be taking into account, the investors in Cruise. I don't think we would more be taking into account the people on the streets who are impacted by this, whereas they're taking into account their bottom line. So that's a completely different calculation that often leads to humans literally getting thrown under the bus.
Absolutely. And, the start of this technology was, really about 10 years ago, more or less, where they were promising that self-driving vehicles would be on the street in 2014, 2015, right? So the investors are getting a little nervous, I think, and a little pushy. It's hard for them to get their money out if there's no IPO in the offing, and these things are years away from an IPO. So I imagine Kyle's getting a lot of pressure from his overseers at Cruise, saying, we need to get our money out here. We've only got 20 billion. We want 30 billion out. So get your ass in gear, Kyle. Move this money out.
Whoa, the wealthy. Not only do they have to deal with this, but they're stuck in the mud at Burning Man. Oh, the poor wealthy. Speaking of stuck in the mud, this is not stuck in the mud at all, but this is going to be one of our new favorite topics, talking about the weight of electric vehicles. We unfortunately can't link to this article, but if you're a subscriber to Automotive News, you can read this article. It's a good one. It's talking about how vehicles keep getting larger and larger and weigh more and more, and that is dangerous. There's a quote in here. And I had it highlighted. Oh, come on. Where did it go? It's fine.
It's okay, Anthony. I think our listeners have accepted your incompetence at this point.
Oh, come on. No,
it's a coffee defect.
It's not a coffee defect. This is a human failure. Okay. This is why I'm not artificially intelligent. But basically, the quote in there is from a young man named Michael Brooks. Talks about, hey, it's a physics problem. The heavier these vehicles get, the more danger it is for other road users. I want to point out this because as a layperson, I think I am most of the time, because I am laying down while recording this, is you don't think of road users, you think of, okay, other drivers. No, road users are pedestrians. Are there people on bicycles? There are people on unicycles. It's everybody else on the road. And I think we always, at least I tend to forget that. So it's not just worrying about the other driver. It's being aware that, someone decided to bolt across the road in front of me. And so this article is great because it says, hey, instead, let's focus on, intelligent speed assist technology. Let's focus on automatic emergency braking. Let's make these things way less. But hey, you guys are the ones who were interviewed, not me.
This is obviously a problem we've talked about for a while now, and it's, happening right in front of our eyes. The data isn't in yet because there simply aren't enough of these super heavy vehicles on the road. The GM Hummer EV is slowly coming out. I think they're over 1,000 or 2,000 made now. We're not really sure how many of those have actually made it to the streets and are running around. The pickup truck and large SUV market is starting to pick up EVs, and those are going to be going out on the roads the next few years. So the data to go back and look at this isn't there yet. I mean, if we want to, we can't show that there are more fatalities, more injuries at this point. But in our experience over 50 years suggests that weight is undefeated in crashes. The more weight you add to a crash, the worse outcomes you're going to have. It's, sheer physics. And unless these vehicles are just dramatically redesigned to account for the additional weight, which they're not being redesigned. If you look at, for instance, an F-150 Lightning versus an F-150, they look very similar, except one weighs 1,800 pounds more than the other. So, and another thing that was in that article, which is just continues to be shocking to me, this is a figure we see that going up every year, is that's now almost 80% of the new vehicles sold are SUVs or trucks. We're not, I own a sedan, it doesn't look like sedans are going to be available much longer. Maybe they're going to go the way of the convertible. And manufacturers are simply going to stop making them because the demand appears to be reducing. And I don't know if it's just the demand. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the big auto companies make more money on SUVs and large trucks. And so they're incentivized to make more of those so that they continue to make more money. It ensures that they have economic growth in their company when the sedan market was, apparently limited in profits for them. So we need smaller cars on the road, and we need a lot more of them in the next 10 years. And right now we're headed in the opposite direction. And we think that's going to have bad outcomes for safety.
Agreed.
We need more public transportation too. We need more buses. We need, because we've talked before about the whole idea that all of the savings available from use of electric vehicles are pretty marginal. I mean, if everybody were driving an electric vehicle, you might save 10 or 20% of the energy that's currently going into gasoline consumption by these vehicles. But this, the idea that you're saving 10 or 20% overall, that's not going to save the world, folks. What will save the world is for you to take the bus, take the train. But one of the problems with that, of course, is that the buses and trains have to exist before you can use them. There's really a high-level policy situation here that needs to be addressed. And it's not going to be, I don't think, because, the nation that has decided to use air travel instead of trains, even when the point-to-point time would be the same, is coming up with an odd energy solution.
Well, hey, Fred, what's good for GM is good for the U.S., right? Maybe not.
Well, they can always build locomotives.
Oh, a GM locomotive. I don't, I'm not sure.
Flying cars.
Flying cars is the answer. Oh my word. I look forward to the recall roundup when we have flying cars. Let's do some recalls and round them up.
Strap in.
Ford recalls again. This is, according to Michael's note, the 5th recall on these vehicles since March 2021. Wait, what? 5 recalls since March 2021? Damn. Hey, listeners, if you're playing at home, guess what this recall concerns? Hey, if you said rear view camera, you're correct. That's right. This is potentially 169,000 plus Ford vehicles, 2020 to 2023 Lincoln Aviators, 2018 to 21 Navigators, some Transits, some Ford Broncos. The rear view camera or 360-degree view camera, if equipped, may not display a rear view image when the vehicle is placed in reverse. I'm not going to assume that what's happening here, but I'm going to tell you a story. When I was in college, I had a professor who worked on GM's assembly line in the 80s. And he said, one of the things we did work slow down. And then what they did is they put something that smells really bad and they painted the inside of the vents on some like Chevy Malibu booze. And so every time people put on the heat, it would smell like rotten eggs in the cars. I know, horrible. But, GM had to keep bringing these cars into the dealer and they had to replace all these vents because they couldn't figure out what it was. With all of these rear view camera issues, is this what's going on? Is this some sort of like labor slowdown? Because this is just, I can't understand why else this is happening. Do we have any guesses?
This one just smacks to me. I mean, there's been so many recalls on this one issue, and every one of them was kind of like well, we're not really sure. One of them, the root cause wasn't determined. We here we'll try this software fix, but ultimately, what the recall that's coming out now is we're going to replace the camera. Finally, so hopefully this is finally the hardware fix that wasn't happening in the previous recalls on this issue, and it's really We see something similar in a lot of recalls now where manufacturers appear to be scrambling to find a cheap software fix to pop onto these vehicles so that they don't have to replace hardware, because that's, instead of pulling into a dealership and getting a quick software update or getting an over-the-air update, at that point, you've got a physical repair to make that involves the mechanic, and a lot more work and time and money goes into the situation. So software updates as recalls are much preferred by the industry at this point, even though they don't address often the physical defect that's present in these vehicles. They're mitigating the problem in many respects, and they offer a cheaper alternative to physical repairs to manufacturers, so they're very popular. That's what this situation looks like. And we've had this 2.5-year period between the time the defect was identified and now when they're actually going to say, okay, we'll replace the camera, which buys them a lot of time and saves them a lot of money in the process as well, and makes it look like they're doing their due diligence to NHTSA, when in fact, under the covers, we're not sure what's going on in a lot of these situations. We've seen them a number of times recently, not just with Ford, also with Hyundai and Kia and other manufacturers, where these recalls seem to drag on. You get a new recall, you're replacing something different this time because the software in the first one didn't work right. When, if in the first instance, these manufacturers make that actual repair that they know will fix the problem, but that's a little more expensive, these issues could be fixed more quickly and consumers would be a lot happier with their purchases. So we think ultimately these kind of strategies are going to fail. And it's something that the agency NHTSA needs to keep an eye on, because they've got a few recall queries going on right now on similar issues. And it's only going, as computers and cars merge into one, this problem is only going to get bigger.
Hey, Michael, can people go to the Piggly Wiggly to get this fixed, or do they have to go to a Ford dealer?
They have to go to a Ford dealer. And that's another thing, we talk about this in the Hyundai Kia theft context. It would be really nice if these software recalls could be brought to consumers versus the other way around. I mean, you're talking about putting a guy in a car with the USB stick that can drive around to consumers and plug it in for them, instead of having every consumer visit the dealership one at a time. And if we want to create better efficiency on our roads, a mobile recall repair for software issues makes a whole lot of sense. And it's something that I hope a lot of manufacturers start doing.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Hey, listeners, Fred may be on the take of the Piggly Wiggly Corporation, but we're not. So go to autosafety.org, click donate, become a monthly donor, $5 a month, $10 a month, $5,000 a month, whatever you want to do. We'll appreciate it. Our next recall, again, involving Ford. Truck emergency release may fail. Nope, lie. This is Kia. I'm sorry, Ford. Trunk emergency release may fail. This is Kia, 319,000 vehicles, recalling certain 2016 to 2017 Rios, Optimas, Optima Hybrid, Optima plug-in vehicles. The trunk latch base may crack, preventing the opening of the trunk from the inside. And we've discussed the safety need around this very issue itself. So definitely get that fixed, right?
Absolutely. This was what we discussed with our with Jeanette Fennell from Kids and Cars, and she and her husband had a terribly traumatic experience in the trunk of a car, and Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 401 was the result of that, after a long fight to get it, basically to ensure that not only to put a glow-in-the-dark trunk handle into the trunk, which is part of the standard, but also to ensure that the trunk can be opened from the inside, which is important in this recall. It appears not that there's some kind of damage to the trunk, the trunk handle, the glow-in-the-dark handle that you're required to pull, but there's a problem with it actually opening the trunk in this recall. And that's important for anyone that's trapped in a trunk. It's not just important if you're kidnapped, it's important if you're a kid and you climb in the trunk on a hot day. So there are a lot of reasons why we need to be able to escape trunks. And, Anthony's kids probably have a few.
Wait, what?
Yeah, but I want to mention that most cars now have an electric trunk release. Right, so you can push a button on the dashboard and the trunk pops open.
Yep.
And if you have children, maybe they're not like my children, but children tend to get into cars and push buttons to see what can happen. If you have a Tesla, they can push a button and drive away the car, but that's a different issue. But this is a real safety issue for anybody with children or anybody in their life who may like to push buttons and fool around. And there's a lot of us out there.
Yep.
If you like to push buttons, maybe a career in engineering's for you. All right, we're out of time. I'm just going to close on one fun little story that I didn't share with either of you guys because it's too good. This is an article in The Guardian. The headline is Toyota blames factory shutdown in Japan on insufficient disk space. Yeah. Toyota has shut down all of its factories in Japan because they ran out of hard drive space. Yeah. And these are companies that we think can make autonomous vehicles. Like, give me a break. They reiterated this was not a cyber attack. Basically, we made a mistake with our database and, I don't know, didn't have the extra hard drives laying around.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, auto manufacturers just as messed up as we are.
Yeah, those are the guys in charge of developing the new solid state battery that's going to save us all.
Oh, hopefully they have enough disk space for that. But we're out of disk space. Thank you, listeners. We'll be in touch with you next week with more exciting news, and we'll see whatever dumb shit Kyle does next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.